For 3,300 years, the most famous face on Earth has been staring back at us, and we never thought to question it. It sits behind glass in what is now the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza, lit by carefully angled spotlights, surrounded by silence and the soft shuffle of millions of shoes. Tour guides speak of it in hushed tones. Scholars have written entire careers around it. Children around the world grow up recognizing it before they can name a single living world leader. It is the golden death mask of Tutankhamun, boy king of ancient Egypt, and for a century it has been the undisputed face of an entire civilization. It weighs just over 10 kilograms. It is 54 centimeters tall. It is encrusted with lapis lazuli, carnelian, obsidian, turquoise, and colored glass paste. And for 100 years, from the moment Howard Carter lifted it from the mummy's wrapped face in the cold winter of 1925, the world has believed without question that it was made for Tutankhamun. Except, and here is where everything begins to unravel, it almost certainly was not. This is not a fringe theory. This is not the kind of breathless speculation that fills weekend television documentaries and then quietly disappears. The evidence has been building for decades, confirmed by laboratory analysis, microscopic examination, and material science that did not even exist when the mask was first discovered. And when you assemble it all, the altered cartouche, the mismatched gold alloys, the visible solder lines, the pierced ears, the facial proportions that match the wrong person, the picture that emerges is one of the most extraordinary acts of historical improvisation ever recorded. A dead pharaoh given someone else's golden face, a royal deception buried under 22 pounds of solid gold, a secret that survived 3 millennia, not because it was well hidden, but because no one had reason to look closely enough to see it. Let us begin where it all started, not in ancient Egypt, but in November of 1922, in the sun-scorched dust of the Valley of the Kings, near modern Luxor. Howard Carter, a British archaeologist who had spent years searching the valley with funding that was almost entirely exhausted, made one final push at the start of a new excavation season. His team cleared the accumulated rubble from a set of stone steps cut into the valley floor. Iron steps that led down to a sealed doorway still bearing the cartouche seals of the ancient necropolis priests. When Carter peered through a small hole broken in that door by candlelight and was asked what he could see, his reply became one of the most famous lines in the history of archaeology. He said he could see wonderful things. He was not wrong. Inside that tomb, untouched for more than 3,000 years, lay one of the greatest single collections of ancient artifacts ever discovered. Thousands of objects, gold everywhere, furniture inlaid with ivory and faience, gilded chariots, alabaster vessels, ritual statues standing guard, weapons, jewelry, perfume oils still faintly fragrant, musical instruments, clothing of the finest linen, and at the very center of it all, inside a series of nested gilded shrines and 3 coffins fitted one inside the other, the innermost one made of solid gold, the mummified body of a young man, and resting over his bandaged face, the mask. Carter noted immediately that the mask was extraordinary. He photographed it, cataloged it with the meticulous care he applied to every object, and eventually transferred it to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo's Tahrir Square, where it remained on display for most of the next century. Generations of visitors filed past it, scholars published papers about its iconography, its inscriptions, its artistic symbolism. The dimensions were precisely recorded, the materials cataloged, the hieroglyphic texts inscribed across its shoulders and back transcribed and translated. They are spells from the Book of the Dead, designed to protect the king in the afterlife. And all of them, every scholar, every curator, every researcher who ever stood in front of the mask accepted a fundamental assumption without question, that the mask had been made for Tutankhamun. Why would they doubt it? His name was on it. His face was on it. It was found in his tomb, covering his face. The logic was circular, airtight, and, as it turned out, built on sand. Assumptions have a way of hardening into facts that were never actually proven. And around 2015, a British Egyptologist named Nicholas Reeves began to look at the mask in a way that nobody had quite looked at it before. Reeves had been doing painstaking photographic work on objects from the tomb, enlarging images to degrees of magnification that earlier technology could not achieve, looking for details that previous examinations had missed or passed over. He was specifically interested in signs of alteration, evidence that objects originally belonging to one person had been modified for another. And what he found on the back of the mask, not the famous golden face, but the reverse side, the part no museum spotlight ever illuminates, the part no visitor ever photographs, stopped him in his tracks. The inscription on the cartouche had been altered. In ancient Egyptian practice, a cartouche was an oval frame of hieroglyphics, enclosing the royal name of a ruler, their official, sacred, eternal identity. The name inside a cartouche was not merely a label, it was, in the Egyptian theological framework, inseparable from the identity of the soul itself. Erasing or altering a cartouche was an act of the most profound significance, used by pharaohs to claim the monuments of their predecessors, to appropriate their legacy, or, in the most hostile cases, to erase them from existence entirely. And Reeves could see, under careful magnification, that the name on this cartouche had not always been the name it bore now. The original hieroglyphics had been modified. Someone, at some point in the ancient past, had taken a mask intended for one ruler and altered its inscription to read as the property of another. And the traces of the original inscription, faint, imperfect, but legible to a trained eye with the right tools, were still there, preserved in the gold, waiting. This was the crack in the facade. And once Reeves identified it, other researchers began pulling at that crack, and what came apart was extraordinary. The most immediately striking physical evidence, the detail so obvious in retrospect that it shocks you to learn it was noticed and then set aside for nearly a century, is the earring holes. The mask has pierced ears, small but unmistakable openings in the earlobes, cleanly made, clearly intentional, of the kind used to hang decorative earrings. Howard Carter himself documented them when he first examined the mask in 1925. He noted the detail in his records. He did not follow up on it. And for the better part of 100 years, the Egyptological community at large accepted this curiosity and moved on. Here is what the earring holes actually mean. Adult male pharaohs in ancient Egypt did not wear earrings. This convention is not universal across all 3,000 years of pharaonic history, but it was firmly established in the Ata-Ur 18th dynasty, the royal house to which Tutankhamun belonged. In the 18th dynasty, earrings were worn by royal women and by young children. When a male prince became a ruling pharaoh, his public imagery shifted to remove or cover the signs of childhood adornment. Images of Tutankhamun from his own reign show him without earrings. Early portraits of him as a young boy do show the pierced ears of childhood, but in those cases, the holes are shown, where they are shown at all, as covered or filled, a visual transition marking the passage from childhood to kingship. The mask has opened, clearly. Functional, fully intact pierced ear holes. No effort was made to fill them, cover them, or disguise them in any way, which means the mask was made for someone who was expected to wear earrings permanently, in death as in life, someone who was a royal woman or a royal child and not an adult male king. Joanne Fletcher, Egyptologist and honorary visiting professor at the University of York, examined this evidence closely as part of the research work that produced significant findings between 2024 and 2025. Her conclusion was stated plainly: the mask was not made for an adult male pharaoh. The ear sockets are consistent with royal women and with royal children of the 18th dynasty. Adult male kings of this period did not wear earrings after childhood. This observation alone is enough to demand serious reconsideration of the mask's origin. Combined with what the materials science revealed, it becomes part of an overwhelming case. That observation opened the door, and the scientific analysis that followed turned a reasonable theory into something extraordinarily difficult to refute. Researchers examining the mask at a microscopic and chemical level discovered something that has proven extremely hard to explain away. The gold of the face and the gold of the rest of the mask are not the same gold. They are measurably, demonstrably different in composition. X-ray crystallography and X-ray fluorescence analysis established that the mask overall is primarily composed of 23-karat gold, alloyed with copper to allow the cold working techniques used to shape it. But the surface is more complex than the interior. The faceplate, the portion showing the actual human features, the broad high forehead, the slightly almond-shaped eyes, the straight nose, the full lips, the rounded chin, carries a surface coating of approximately 30 nanometers of 18-karat gold alloy. The headdress, the broad decorative collar, the back panel with its inscriptions, the rest of the mask, are finished in 22.5-karat gold. These are not subtle, debatable differences. They are reproducible, measurable differences confirmed by multiple analytical techniques. The face and the mask around it were made from different gold. And along the boundary between the faceplate and the surrounding structure, running along the precise line where face meets headdress, there are solder marks, physical, metallurgical evidence of joining. The face was not cast as part of a single unified object. It was manufactured separately, then attached. The face, in the most literal and material sense, was grafted onto a body that already existed. Microscopic studies also revealed additional signs of modification. An insert was added at the base of the chin, a small but structurally significant addition. Cuts were made at the earlobes to accommodate the existing piercings. The overall geometry of the joint is consistent with a skilled but time-pressured adaptation, professional work, but not the work of craftsmen with unlimited time and unlimited material. The work of people who needed to finish quickly and who were working with a pre-existing object rather than creating from scratch. A team working between Cairo and Oxford subsequently examined the chemical makeup of the alloys in detail, attempting to use the compositional data to identify the workshops where the different portions were produced. Their findings were consistent with two distinct phases of production separated in time, the headdress and body of the mask made during one period, the faceplate added separately during another, combined with the University of York's proportional analysis, which found that the geometry of the faceplate corresponded more closely to known representations of Queen Nefertiti than to any known representation of Tutankhamun. The accumulation of evidence became very difficult to attribute to coincidence or misinterpretation. What appears to have happened is this. A death mask was made in the Amarna period, or shortly after it, for a ruler of the 18th dynasty who was female, or who was still a child when the mask was commissioned. That mask was completed, inscribed with the ruler's name, and at some point, after that ruler died or was deposed before receiving a royal burial, repurposed. The faceplate was removed. A new faceplate was cast, using a different alloy, bearing the features of Tutankhamun. That plate was soldered onto the existing mask body. The cartouche was reinscribed. The mask was placed over the young king's face, and the seal was set on the tomb. Why was there such improvisation? Because Tutankhamun died suddenly at roughly 19 years of age. His tomb, which structural and spatial analysis suggests was not originally built for a pharaoh at all, but was most likely a pre-existing tomb of a nobleman or minor royal pressed into emergency royal service, was not complete or properly equipped. The antechamber was packed so densely that it appeared less like a planned royal burial and more like a rapid accumulation of available objects. Tomb paintings were left with visible signs of hurried execution. Multiple objects within the tomb show evidence of modification and reuse. Coffins with altered inscriptions, canopic equipment with reworked imagery, shrines with changed cartouches. The pattern is consistent throughout the tomb. The mask is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a systematic pattern of repurposing Amarna period burial equipment for the boy king who came after the Amarna rulers. The question of whose equipment it originally was leads, by every line of evidence, to Nefertiti. She is one of the most famous figures in all of ancient history, recognized above all by the painted limestone bust in Berlin's Neues Museum, which has been reproduced so many millions of times it has become as much a universal symbol as a historical artifact. She was the principal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, and far more than a consort. Artistic and inscriptional evidence from the city of Amarna depicts her smiting enemies in the traditional posture of kingship, driving chariots, performing the central rituals of the Aten cult alongside her husband on equal footing. Her cartouche appears throughout the sacred spaces of Amarna. She held real power, not the ceremonial title of a queen, but the functional authority of a co-ruler. And then, after the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, she disappears from the record. Her name stops appearing. For more than a century, Egyptologists have debated what happened. The theory that has gained the most scholarly traction in recent years is that she did not disappear at all. She transformed. When Akhenaten died, Nefertiti assumed the throne in her own right, ruling Egypt under the name Nefer-Nefer-Uaten. The evidence for this is built from a cluster of artifacts, inscriptions, and grammatical markers that point to a female ruler by this name governing Egypt during precisely the years between Akhenaten's death and Tutankhamun's coronation. She appears to have presided over the early stages of the religious counter-revolution, the restoration of the old gods, the reopening of the temples, before handing power to the young Tutankhamun. Nefer-Nefer-Uaten never received the royal burial she was entitled to. When her reign ended, the dismantling of the Amarna legacy accelerated. Akhenaten's name was being erased from monuments. The city of Amarna was being abandoned, its stones stripped for reuse. The very memory of the Amarna interlude was being suppressed from official history. In this context, the burial equipment that had been prepared for Nefer-Nefer-Uaten during her reign, coffins, canopic jars, shrines, death mask, was simply available. It was royal in quality, already crafted to the highest specifications, and it was going to waste. Professor Aidan Dodson has argued that this equipment was gradually reallocated to Tutankhamun over the course of his reign, meaning his burial was substantially equipped long before his sudden death. The death did not force a desperate scramble. It simply triggered the deployment of equipment that had been waiting. The modification of the mask's face, the removal of the original faceplate, and the soldering on of Tutankhamun's features was the most intimate act in that reallocation. Everything else could be reinscribed, relabeled, altered at the surface, but the face of a death mask was different. The face was the identity. To place another person's death mask over a pharaoh's face was to say, at the deepest level of Egyptian theology, that the face did not belong to him. So they replaced it. They cast a new face and soldered it on. And then they sealed the tomb and walked away, and the face that looked like Nefertiti's, attached to a mask inscribed with Tutankhamun's name, was buried beneath the rubble of the valley, forgotten for 33 centuries. What they left behind, preserved in the metal itself, was the complete record of what they had done. The different alloys, the solder lines, the pierced ears, the traces of the original cartouche inscription. They left these things not as clues, but as irrelevancies, details no one would ever see because the tomb was sealed and the world had moved on. They did not anticipate Howard Carter. They did not anticipate X-ray crystallography or spectroscopic analysis, or a generation of scholars specifically looking for evidence of Amarna period cover-ups. They buried their evidence in gold because gold lasts forever, not realizing that it would last long enough to be read. The Grand Egyptian Museum, which opened its complete Tutankhamun galleries in November of 2025, now displays all 5,298 catalogued objects from the tomb together for the first time in history. The full collection was moved from the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square between 2020 and 2024, transferred with extraordinary care to the climate-controlled conservation facilities of the new museum on the Giza Plateau. For the first time, visitors can see every object Carter found. Not the 1,200 or so that were ever on display in Tahrir, but all of them. The 6 chariots and the weapons cache that revealed Tutankhamun not as a sickly boy king, but as a warrior who led his army. The gilded throne discovered beneath the funerary couches, its back panel showing the young king and his queen in a moment of intimate domesticity, a snapshot of a life cut short at 19. The extraordinary canopic shrine with its guardian goddesses, the innermost coffin of solid gold, and the mask in the position of honor that it has always occupied, the object above all objects, the face above all faces. Visitors who stand before it now stand before something more layered and more haunting than previous generations understood. They are looking at a masterpiece of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship, certainly. They are looking at a symbol of one of history's great archaeological discoveries, but they are also looking at the material record of an ancient act of erasure, at a face that was replaced, a name that was overwritten, an identity that was appropriated and then buried for 30 centuries. They are looking, almost certainly, at the golden structure that once held the face of Nefertiti, queen and pharaoh of Egypt, modified in haste in the years around 1323 BC, so that it could serve another ruler's eternity instead of hers. Whether she is buried nearby, or in the hidden chambers that radar surveys have hinted at, behind the painted plaster walls of Tutankhamun's own burial chamber, remains, as of today, entirely unknown. Nicholas Reeves's hypothesis that her tomb lies behind a sealed door in the same rock that holds Tutankhamun's has been neither confirmed nor definitively ruled out. Multiple radar surveys have produced conflicting results. No physical investigation of the walls has been authorized. The question sits open, as Egyptian questions have a way of doing, waiting for the next instrument, the next technique, the next scholar willing to look where others have not thought to look. What is no longer seriously in dispute is that the mask carries within it the evidence of its own transformation. The science has spoken clearly, through multiple independent investigations and multiple independent lines of analysis. The faceplate was made separately and attached. The alloys are different. The earholes belong to a woman or a child. The cartouche was altered. These are not interpretations. They are physical facts, as durable as the gold itself. And taken together, they describe an object with a history that stretches back before Tutankhamun, to a woman whose name was almost erased from history, whose burial was taken from her, and whose face was replaced with another's, and who has been staring out at the world, unknown and unacknowledged from behind the most famous golden mask ever made, for 3,300 years. The gold kept the secret, as gold always does, perfect, patient, indifferent to the names of the dead who wore it, and to the names of the living who thought they understood it. It kept the secret for 33 centuries. And now, slowly, imperfectly, against every intention of the people who buried it, the secret is giving itself back. We were looking at the wrong face, and the right one was there all along. There's another layer to this story that deserves its own moment, because it speaks to something larger than one mask or one ruler. It speaks to how official history is made, and unmade, and made again. The ancient Egyptians were not naive about the power of images. They understood with great sophistication that to control the representations of a person was to control how that person existed in eternity. The Egyptian afterlife was not merely a spiritual concept. It was deeply tied to memory, to name, to the ongoing performance of ritual. A person whose name was spoken, whose image was maintained, whose offerings were made, continued to exist in some meaningful sense. A person whose name was erased, whose images were defaced, whose monuments were pulled down, that person was subjected to the second death, the death that erased even the echo. It was the most final punishment the ancient world could conceive. The court that repurposed Nefertiti's burial equipment was not simply being practical. They were engaged in an act of ideological violence dressed in the language of practical administration. They were saying, in effect, that the woman who had ruled Egypt, who had co-created the Amarna Revolution, who had presided over the transition back from that revolution, did not exist. Her gold was now someone else's gold. Her mask was now someone else's mask. Her face was now someone else's face. Her name on the cartouche was replaced with another name, and the replacement was so thorough and the subsequent destruction of Amarna period records so systematic that for centuries the very existence of the Amarna pharaohs was unknown to Egyptians themselves. The king lists that later scribes compiled simply leapt over that entire period. Horemheb, the general who eventually took power after Tutankhamun, officially dated his reign from the death of Amenhotep III, skipping over Akhenaten, Neferneferuaten, and Tutankhamun entirely. As far as official Egyptian history was concerned, for hundreds of years, the Amarna period simply never happened. Nefertiti was erased so thoroughly that it took the chance discovery of the Amarna city ruins in the 18th century, and then the steady accumulation of Egyptological scholarship over the following 200 years to even begin to reconstruct who she was. The Berlin bust was excavated in 1912 and immediately became one of the most recognized images in the world. But for decades, scholars debated who it actually depicted. Her full story, her political power, her likely role as pharaoh, the probability that she is the person behind the burial equipment in Tutankhamun's tomb. These are conclusions that have crystallized only in the last decade, driven by a combination of careful textual scholarship and the material science that has finally been applied to the objects themselves. What the science did, what the X-ray fluorescence analysis and the spectroscopic examination and the microscopic solder line mapping actually did, was give Nefertiti back a form of physical testimony that no ancient official could erase. You can alter a cartouche, you can dismantle a temple, you can instruct scribes to omit a name from the king list, but you cannot change the atomic composition of a gold alloy. You cannot unsolder two pieces of metal and make the join disappear. You cannot look at two different carats of gold and make them identical by decree. The physical evidence is beyond the reach of ancient political revision. It survived 3,000 years of deliberate erasure precisely because it was encoded in the material itself, invisible to anyone who was not looking for it, indestructible to anyone who was. This is, in a way, a story about the limits of power. The ancient Egyptian state was, by the standards of its era, one of the most total and effective political systems ever devised. It commanded resources, labor, and loyalty on a scale that would not be matched for millennia. It could build structures that stood for 4,000 years. It could organize the construction of the pyramids, the administration of a civilization spanning the length of the Nile, the management of one of the most complex religious and ritual systems in human history. And it could, with considerable efficiency, erase people from history. But it could not change what the gold knew. It could not alter the atomic record that the craftsman left in the alloy, the solder lines that the metalworkers left at the join, the ear holes that the original maker left for a woman who was never going to have the chance to wear her own mask. 3,000 years later, the instruments caught it. The science found it. And Nefertiti, queen, co-regent, pharaoh, the woman behind the most famous face in the history of Egyptology, is, slowly, being given back what was taken from her. Not her burial, not her tomb, wherever it is, not even formally her mask, which will remain in a display case labeled with the name of the boy king, but her story, her presence in the object, her face, which the alloy remembers even when the inscription does not. The gold kept the secret. Now the secret belongs to everyone.